The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios.
Hi, this is Mia Mosinzia, also known as Mia No Time for Love. Check out my latest book, Missing, available on Amazon.
The Mike Wagner Show, also brought to you by The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, available on Amazon, highlighting the Book of David.
It's now time for the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Anchor FM, Radio Public, and themikewagnershow.com. Mike brings you great guests and interesting people from all across the globe. So sit back, relax, and enjoy another great episode of the Mike Wagner Show.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios, brought to you by official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Mosinzia Missing. Coming soon, Missing 2 by Mia Mosinzia, double suspense, double the fun. Check it out on Amazon. Also brought to you by Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of King David and 30 exquisite paintings. Check out the Sweet Psalmist on Amazon, keyword Sweet Psalmist Serena Wagner today. We're here with a terrific gentleman who's a multi-talented author who grew up in rural Maine, now in Charlottesville, Virginia. He studied English literature, Spanish language, and also culture from Harvard University. Earned his master's in American New England Studies from University of Southern Maine. He worked in media publishing, writing, is also instructor. He collaborated with his father's arts and education organization called Americans Who Tell the Truth. He founded, edited, and also wrote for Inside Mexico. He has a new book out, which basically describes the story of the Greensboro Massacre in '79. And what is that about? We'll talk about the Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre, and the struggle for American city soul. Live, ladies and gentlemen, plus dudes in beautiful downtown Charlotte, Virginia. Multi-talented author who grew up in rural Maine, currently in Charlottesville, Virginia, with the book Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre. Ladies and gentlemen, the multi-talented Aran Shetterly. Aran, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Good evening, Mike. Great to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on board, Aran. So you're a multi-talented author who grew up in rural Maine. You're currently in Charlottesville, Virginia. You study English literature, Spanish language, and culture from Harvard, and you also earned your master's in American and New England Studies from University of Southern Maine. You also worked in media, publishing, writer, instructor. You also worked with your dad in Americans Who Tell the Truth. You also founded, edited, wrote Inside Mexico. You have a brand new book that's up, basically describing the story of the Greensboro Massacre in '79. 5 people were killed, 10 injured in the Death of the Klan March, where activists, milkers, locals gathered at the Morningside Black Public Housing Development. And there was a lot that happened in history as well, too. Somehow forgotten. Why is it significant? For getting on, Aran, tell us how you first got started.
You know, you make me sound all those things pretty restless, Mike. I have wandered around a little bit. You're right about that.
Right. Yeah. We're going from Maine to Virginia, so it's just like it's almost like a nice East Coast hop and a drive there. So
yeah, but that's a roundabout arrival in Virginia, Mike. I lived in Mexico for almost 11 years. I lived in Cuba for a little while. I lived in Miami. And ended up in beautiful Charlottesville, Virginia, because my wife's from Virginia. She's from and went to the University of Virginia, which is right here in town. And so that's what brought me here, and it's been a nice place to be. But it actually is part of the story of why I wrote this book. But we'll get into that. But what got me started really was my mom's a writer, my dad's a painter. I went off and did a whole bunch of different things. I worked in the internet business. I worked in publishing, but I always wanted to write. And eventually I had the courage to go off and try to actually do that, and wrote a book about Cuba, and then came upon this story, which I thought was just too important not to spend the time investigating and writing about.
Mm-hmm. And what was that one precise moment that simply influenced you into what you do in the rest of your career?
You know, what really happened was, I was on a trip to Cuba with my dad, who's the painter, because we wanted to look at Cuban art. And we were doing that. We were on this trip, and the art was fantastic. And we were going to these artist studios. But since it was a group trip, we were also going to see hospitals where Cubans could show us their healthcare system. And then we were in this conversation about, this is, 22 years ago, a conversation about how the Cuban politics work. And in that, I asked a question. I said, because I'd studied the Spanish Civil War and the Abraham Lincoln Brigades and the internationals who went to Spain in the 30s to fight against fascism and against Franco. And I said, was there anything like that here during the Cuban Revolution in 1957, 58, 59, when the rebels in Cuba were fighting against the dictator Fulgencio Batista, and eventually Castro and his rebels won? And they said, no, there never really was anything like that, but there was this one guy. And his assistant said, yes, William Morgan. And it was like, William Morgan. And the hair stood up on the back of my neck. And
wow.
I came home with that name and sent a FOIA request to the CIA. And I got back this stack of documents, half of which had been redacted, all blacked out. And I thought, I need to know what's in there. And that was my off and running moment, to be honest with you, Mike. I was compelled to find out the story of this guy, William Morgan from Toledo, Ohio, who became a hero in Cuba during the revolution and then was executed by Castro right before the Bay of Pigs as a traitor. So,
oh my gosh, that had to be something. And what was William Mason, doing at the time as well?
What'd you say?
What was he doing at the time?
Mean when he went to Cuba?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's an interesting story. Here's a guy who grew up in an upper middle class family in Toledo who never fit in and dropped out of high school, joined the Merchant Marine, ended up getting mixed up with gangsters and was running guns into Toledo when
oh wow
into Cuba, I mean, from the U.S. and then ended up actually believing that the rebels were fighting a just cause and sort of turned his life around and gave it some meaning by joining their cause.
That is interesting. And I forgot to mention the book you have, The Americano, Fighting for Castro for Cuba's Freedom. I forgot to mention that. I can't believe
that's all right. But we got into it because you asked what my inciting moment was. And what I learned then was I love to write narrative history. I love to put together these big puzzles and investigate sort of forgotten parts of our history and figure out what they mean, and why they're still meaningful and what they can illuminate about who we are at any given moment.
Mm-hmm. It seems like it as well, too. You've been influenced by a number of writers as well. Who are some of your favorite authors, writers, and your favorite books growing up?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I grew up reading everything of Hemingway, and then I graduated to some books like, I feel like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man is one of the greatest books I've ever read. So there's fiction, but then, there's so many great nonfiction writers writing these days, whether it's Eric Larson writing his stories or David Grann and a lot of people who've taken the art of telling nonfiction stories to such a high level. It's really inspiring.
Mm-hmm. And certainly you did as well, too. You've also got an inspiring book called Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre and the Struggle for an American City. So we'll get to that with Aran Shetterly. But first, you listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today, 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to sonicwebstudios@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show. Get 20% off your first project. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level. Also, time to give an official shout out to our official sponsor, The Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Molson-Zia. If you love fast-paced mysteries, you love Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing is fast-paced and intriguing with an unforgettable twist. Takes place in 4 countries, 2 strangers, 1 target, where truth is illusion and those who love you to first go missing. It's available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing by Mia Molson-Zia has garnered great reviews. And Evil Evan enjoys by Howard celebrities including Joanna Cassie, Forrest Riley, and many others. So grab your copy today. Virgo's Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon. Coming soon, Missing 2 by Mia Molson-Zia. Double the suspense, double the fun. Check it out on Amazon. Also brought to you by A Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of King David, including 30 exquisite pains. And as a shepherd, he wrote as well, too. It's gives a new perspective of David throughout the years. And also, it's time where Shepherd started, was complicated and turbulent relationship with King Saul. It's a love story of love, betrayal, hope, repentance, and more. Check out the Sweet Psalmist Serena Wagner on Amazon. Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner. Keyword Sweet Psalmist Serena Wagner. And also check out the Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, 40 podcast platforms. Make sure you heard 100 countries. Take us with you on any mobile device. For great gift ideas, go to amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast, t-shirts, pop sockets, throw pillows, tote bags, hoodies. Makes great gifts 24/7. Go to amazon.com. Be sure to check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast for more great gift ideas. Go to amazon.com/me and Wilson Zia for great books like Missing, Once, Wrinkles, merchandise, and more. Amazon.com/me and Wilson Zia. I'll support the Mike Wagner Show on Anchor FM, PayPal, and the MikeWagnerShow.com. We're here with the multi-talented author who grew up in rural Maine, now in Charlottesville, Virginia, of Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre, and the struggle for American city soul, Aran Shetterly, here on the Mike Wagner Show. Before getting back to the book about the 1979 Greensboro Massacre, you worked in media, publishing, you're also a writing instructor. You also worked with your dad as well, too, in Americans Who Tell the Truth. I'd like to hear more about that one.
Yeah, well, my dad paints these portraits of Americans who've spoken truth to power throughout American history. He's painted about 280 of them now, Mike. So
wow.
There are a lot, and he doesn't sell them. What they do is they travel around the country in these sort of curated exhibits. If people want to tell a story about women's rights or civil rights or indigenous rights or whistleblowers or different issues, they can pick out a set of portraits and exhibit them in their town halls, community centers, schools, universities.
Wow.
And so they travel around basically to start conversations about how our democracy works, how change happens. It's been very effective. Kids and students and community members love sort of seeing the portraits, being challenged by the portraits, thinking about them, and having conversations.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the conversations you guys have, the most popular ones, and maybe like, the most unusual or the most that just, really got things going?
In the Americans Who Tell the Truth?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you an example. Syracuse University uses them in a really interesting way. So, for example, the Maxwell School of Public Policy at Syracuse is this beautiful, has this beautiful building, and in the center of the sort of entryway, this big white marble space, is a life-size portrait of George Washington.
Oh my
Fantastic
goodness.
portrait. And it's been there since, 1930 something. So a few years ago, as you can imagine, some students began to say, he's a complicated person. How should we think about, George Washington a little bit? We want to complicate George Washington. And they said, here's an idea. Let's take these Americans Who Tell the Truth portraits and surround George Washington with them. Instead of taking a statue down, and I agree with the way they've handled this, instead of taking it down, surround him with these other figures from American history and imagine conversations and dialogue between them. So what would George Washington and Malcolm X talk about? What would George Washington and Ida B. Wells talk about? What would George Washington and Elizabeth Cady Stanton talking about? And so, these are the kinds of, I feel like, value that this project can bring to, instead of just saying we're going to cancel someone or let's have a dialogue. Let's imagine how these figures could work these things out together, or I think how they would challenge each other.
I think that's a really good idea. There's been too many statues have been taken down, because this whole cancel culture thing. It's like, how else are we going to learn about history? And it's basically like, how we're going to learn. And this thought came to my mind about how you say about George Washington. If there was a statue of so-and-so, you would talk about. I also thought about, what would George Washington have a conversation about, say, Martin Luther King Jr.?
Yeah, exactly. Great point. What would that conversation be like? Where would they agree and where would they disagree? Or where could they change each other's mind, perhaps? Could be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe I'm with Michael Jordan next to him. So,
yeah, that would be a very different conversation, I imagine.
I won't be surprised. And of course, at least he did admit to cutting the cherry tree down, which is the one thing I dare learn about George. He did cut the cherry tree down. So,
That's right. Well, I guess he tried to tell the truth most of the time, so, you know, good on him.
Yes, it did. And he also founded, edited, and wrote for Inside Mexico. I think we covered that one, did we not? Or
Not really, but Inside Mexico, my wife and I, she's a writer also, we had this idea that there are about 1 million Americans who live in Mexico, full or part-time. And we thought, they need a good media, some good media in English. And so we went down there, we got in our Honda Element and drove down to Mexico and started putting out a magazine and a website that sort of deepen their understanding of the place they were. It was a great adventure, not successful as a business, but we learned a lot about a wonderful country and wonderful people, and had a real adventure.
And certainly did too. And of course, the adventure we're going to talk about soon is Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre, and the struggle for American City soul, piecing together about what happened during that time. We'll talk about in a few moments with Aran Shetterly. You listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios, brought to you by official sponsor of The Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Molson Missing. Also, Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of King David, Amazon.com. Keyword Serena Wagner, Sweet Psalmist. We'll be back with you, Lieutenant Aran Shetterly of Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre, after this timeout.
The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios. If you're looking to start or upgrade your online presence, visit www.sonicwebstudios.com for all of your online needs. Call 1-800-303-3960 or visit us online at www.sonicwebstudios.com to get started today. Mention The Mike Wagner Show and get 20% off your project. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level.
Hi, I'm Burl Barer, legendary American author, and I'm here to tell you about Missing, the new mystery suspense novel by Mian Mosensia. It's really a good book. Very surprising. Never metaphor I didn't like, especially in this book. Here you have a main character whose life has been filled with despair. His wife died in 9/11. His young daughter died of a rare disease. He's not a happy camper. What does he do for a living? He's a physical fitness trainer. When somebody hardly knows, somebody he's never met, he only has encountered them on an internet chat line, goes missing. This is his journey. He's going to go rescue them. This is his search for redemption, his search for his own personal promised land. He couldn't do anything about the death of his wife, the death of his child, but maybe he can rescue this woman he's never met. That is, if she exists. Missing by Mian Mosensia, international in scope, vastly entertaining, full of surprises. I suggest you get it in either paperback or an electronic edition for your Kindle. Missing by Mian Mosensia.
The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Serena Wagner's book, The Sweet Psalmist, now available on Amazon. This book includes 30 exquisite paintings by well-known and unknown painters and King David Psalms. The Sweet Psalmist gives us a new perspective on his life in this book. Through the Psalms he wrote, his time as a shepherd in the field is where the book starts, and it goes on to describe his complicated and turbulent relationship with King Saul as well as other events. It's a story of love, betrayal, repentance, and more. It also offers advice on approaching God and living a life that pleases him. Check out the book, The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, now available on Amazon. Keywords, Sweet Psalmist, Serena Wagner.
Hey, this is Ray Powers, and boy, are you in luck. Right place, right time. Tuned in to The Mike Wagner Show. You heard me.
We're back with author Aran Shetterly of Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre and the Struggle for American City Soul, here on the Mike Wagner Show. And of course, this is the book which basically describes the story of the Greensboro Massacre. In 79, 5 were killed, 10 were injured in the Death to the Klan March. Activists, mill workers, and locals gather at the Morningside Black Public Housing, and one of them, a key figure, was injured. And a bit more about the story as well and how it all came together.
So in 2015, and it's good we talked about Americans Who Tell the Truth, I was down in Greensboro because my father had a show of portraits there at the International Civil Rights Center and Museum. So what we know about Greensboro, and if we know anything often, is that the sit-in movement started there in 1960 and sort of spread across the South and ended up desegregating public spaces around the South. And so he had a show of portraits there in that old Woolworths. And the woman who organized that said, there are a couple people you really should meet while you're here. And so we went to this little Salvadoran cafe, sort of on the edge of downtown Greensboro, and in walked Reverend Nelson Johnson and his wife, Joyce Johnson.
Oh, wow.
And they told a story and about what had happened on November 3rd, 1979, how they had been working with this multiracial group of activists to organize the textile mills in Greensboro in that area, which were still some of the largest textile mills in the whole world. The blue jean dungaree material came out of Greensboro for 100 years that made Levi's. And so they were having trouble organizing workers across race. And they thought the Klan was interfering with that effort. And so they decided to have a conference and a march to educate workers in Greensboro about how important it was for Black and white workers to come together to express, their demands to management for better health care, better working hours, better conditions, better, benefits. And as they're setting up that morning of November 3rd, 1979, singing some songs and chanting and getting ready to march, a caravan of Klansmen and neo-Nazis drives up, picks a fight, starts shooting, and in 88 seconds, as you've said, 5 people were dead and 10 injured. No one was ever held criminally responsible for this, Mike. And we're talking about trials that went into the 1980s. And so one of the things, and so I sat there with them and I thought, how do I not know this history? This seems significant. It seems meaningful. And beyond that, they were such extraordinary people. They had such magnetism. They had such compassion. They had such optimism. These were not cynical people. They were people still out there trying to do the work, to work for poor and marginalized people in America. And I thought, wow, I would like to spend some more time with them. So a couple years later, when I had the opportunity to work on a new big project, I went down there and I said, can I basically spend some time with you hearing your stories and researching this history? And they said yes. It was a real privilege of them to say that to me, actually.
That was very interesting. And of course, when I read about this and I thought this was hardly ever mentioned, I remember being in high school in 79. This was like maybe got this little attention. Of course, in the 60s, you had the Watch riots in LA. And of course, you had the Harlem riots in New York, and you had Detroit that was going at, Chicago was going at. And of course, move forward, St. Louis, had them burned. Of course, you had Atlanta, Miami, and all these cities were burning with riots and got massive attention. But why was it that I was scratching my head that Greensboro only got this much attention? I don't understand it.
There are a few reasons for that. But one of them is that the very next day, the hostages were taken at the American embassy in Tehran, Iran. And all of a sudden, this big international story, which was much easier to talk about in a way, it was us versus them, as opposed to us versus us. These complicated domestic stories are hard to talk about and hard to figure out, where we stand sometimes or what it means. And so that pushed it off. But, Project Censored came out in 1980 or 81, I guess, and said it was one of the most censored stories of the 79 and 80. And at the heart of my book is the mystery about why law enforcement didn't prevent this violence that day. They had informants in the Klan. They had informants in the Nazi group, an infiltrator actually in the Nazi group. They had enough information to stop the caravan before it even got to these marchers, and they didn't do it. And so that's one of the things that I have to explore, and it's difficult, uncomfortable history. But I think very important. And one of the things that is important in my mind is we like to tell, on Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month, a neat, tidy version of what the civil rights movement was. And the thing is that it's much longer, it's much more complicated, and it's not as neat and tidy as we would like it to be. And I think that this is one of those stories that shows that. And I wanted to lean into that and explore that. About how, unfulfilled dreams lead to more action and more conflict. And this is one of those examples.
Also made me think about where nobody was convicted, nobody was acquitted, nobody went to jail. they never found out. What was it, because the police were intimidated by the Klan? Was there influence that was causing, or was it a payout, or was there a thing that's like, hey, don't investigate and everything like that? How did it come about where it's like, they come in, like you see the riots, they arrest so many rioters. How come nobody was arrested? Was it like the police simply were just afraid? Did the Klan didn't have much power? Or was the mayor involved with simply saying that, hey, don't do this. I don't want to lose my job.
So I think there are a couple of things, but one is that, the activists at that point had decided to call themselves communists. They were American communists working in the mills. Depth of Cold War, scary to a lot of Americans, unclear about what that even meant. These were not people who were beholden to the Soviet Union or to China. They were homegrown people who believed that if fundamental change was going to happen in this country, it needed to happen from working people, basically taking over the means of production somehow, but at the very least, organizing in the mills. But they had some radical beliefs, there's no question about it. And they were provocative, and they were making a difference. And some of those mill owners, some of the city leaders were scared of these guys. And one of the things that it seems to me is that we spend so much time normalizing to some degree the sort of radical right? Thinking about how it is a part of who we are, right? Not that we agree with it, but explaining it and understanding what its historical legacy is. What we don't do is look at the historical legacy on the left and understand that that's also part of us. Instead, we call it anti-American a lot of the time. And so when this case got to juries and they were choosing between these sort of, in their mind, patriotic Klansmen, right, defending the country from communism, and these radicals who were trying to upset the apple cart, if you will, they felt more comfortable with the Klansmen. And I think that the police were annoyed and aggravated by these people who were always demonstrating, causing some conflict, in the mills, and would just assume they were embarrassed and put out of business.
I see, right there. So it was where the police were afraid and everything. Did they have to follow the rule to the law about how to handle these riots, or was some ordinance say don't do this or anything like that? Do you think the Greensboro police, did they act properly, or was it just simply they just made the wrong call or so?
Well, let me put it this way. They knew the Klan was coming, and there wasn't a single policeman there that morning. They knew the Klan was coming, and they didn't warn the activists that there might be trouble. So I think they stayed out of the way.
Okay.
I don't think they acted properly, no.
Mm-hmm. And of course, piecing all the narratives, you talk to you talked to a leader of the group who managed to survive. And was there anybody else that was willing to step up and talk more about it, or is it more like a hush hush that still had that stigma? It's like they suffered PTSD.
That's a great question. This was trauma. It was trauma for the people who were there that day. It was trauma for the people who were shot. I mean, obviously, or loved the people who were shot. It was trauma for the shooters. It was trauma for the city. And so there were a lot of different traumas, a lot of anger. And when I went down there and started researching this, I felt that, and I felt that tension. Here I was 40 years later, and you could still feel that tension. You could feel still the discomfort. And it had thawed since that time, but it was still palpable. And I had some very strange, experiences. For example, I sat down with a man who had been a editor of one of the local newspapers. And he said to me, well, no one knows who fired the first shot. Well, they do know who fires the first shot. That's sort of a convenient narrative to, in a sense, spread blame equally between the activists and the Klansmen and Nazis, and to deflect from the responsibility that the city had. What's interesting is during the course of my research, there was movement. So in 2020, in the October of 2020, um, over Zoom, the City Council of Greensboro held a special session. And in that, they apologized for the violence that day and for the fact that the police hadn't prevented it. And so they finally assumed responsibility for what had happened. And so what I was able to do, and what was felt important to me, was to show that by not letting go of this history, by holding on to it, by continuing to insist, I'm talking about Nelson Johnson and his wife Joyce and others, that it be relevant. Eventually, people came around and were able to hear it and be able to begin to accept something of the truth. And then when that happens, then a reckoning can happen. Then some reconciliation and healing can happen. But it's really hard to do that until, in a sense, people really face what their own history is.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, if it were to happen today, do you think this could have been handled better or anything like that, handled different? And do you think people still talk about it's like, is it, we're going to learn from it? Is it going to happen again? How do we handle this next time and everything else?
Here's one thing I felt about it, which is this event, and other historians have noted this too, had sort of a detonating moment for sort of white nationalism and Christian nationalism, that it became a flag in the a planted flag to some degree for those folks. And these guys who did that shooting became heroes and went around recruiting white nationalists around the country. So the point I'm trying to make is there was no accountability, right? No one was held criminally responsible. No one went to jail. These guys felt impunity. They felt empowered. They felt that they actually had people behind them. And I tell you, that has a long legacy. So when, Dylan Roof, you remember that guy who walked into the church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015.
I remember that. Boom, 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 all across the board.
Horrible.
Oh.
He was inspired in part by this Greensboro Massacre. So when I was working on this, a good friend of mine that I went to college with said, Aran, you have to remember bad ideas travel too. And the thing is, I feel like we're seeing some of that today in our country. It's like if we don't hold bad actors accountable, they come back stronger.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good point you made as well, too. It made me think of, Kyle Rittenhouse, what happened around Kenosha, and also thought about one of the guys, I forget his name, started shooting in Highland Park, Illinois. And it's almost like that they kind of took that, what happened in Greensboro, and kind of made their playbook, sadly.
Exactly. Yeah. These guys know their history. They know about these events. And they talk about them,
Okay. And what can we do to prevent this in the future? And what do you want readers to get from the book?
I think that the journey that Greensboro has made is a significant journey. It's made a journey through this, dealing with this difficult history and trying to face it in different ways. And one of the things they did along the way was they held a truth and reconciliation process in Greensboro to really bring the community together and have a heartfelt conversation and listen to all the different voices and produce a report that was hugely helpful to me as I wrote this book. But I think that what I hope it does, there isn't a community in this country that doesn't have some skeletons in the closet or hard things that have happened. It's not always about race. It's about class. It's about different things that have happened. And they're hard to talk about often. And I think the example that Greensboro gives is that by insisting that it be talked about, actually progress can be made. And I hope that people take that away. I also hope they take the inspiration of the Johnsons, who are at the center of this book, as these people who have kept searching for ways to improve the lives of the marginalized and poor among us, and they stopped being communists after this. They sort of chose a more liberation theology, Christian path to do the same work, really. And I'm so inspired by their relentless struggle to make this country more democratic. And I hope people will take that away.
And do you think this will ever level with Martin Luther King trying to achieve peace and everything like that?
They call their center now the Beloved Community Center. It's a phrase they took from Martin Luther King, right? It was this ideal of a community that really embraces itself, and all its diversity. And you walk into their Beloved Community Center, and it feels like one of the most accepting places you've ever been in your life, where anyone can talk, but everyone has to listen, and so I would, I think that we have to have people in spaces who try to insist on that. Otherwise, it'll get lost. And these are people who've spent, years and years holding on to that dream.
And I think that's a really good one to involve as well, too. And where can we find your book, Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre and the Struggle for American City Soul at?
You can find it anywhere books are sold, man. I mean, ask your local bookstore, order it online from your favorite place to order it. And if you want to talk with me, come to my website, AranShetterly.com. Send me a note. I would love to. I respond to everyone who comes through there, and it's fun to hear what people think.
All right, we'll certainly do that as well. We encourage everybody to buy the book. We're here with the multi-talented author Aran Shetterly of Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre, and the Struggle for American City Soul, and Mike Wagner Show. Aran, just a few more things. What else can we expect from you in 2025 and beyond?
From me?
Yes.
Well, I'm very excited, actually. I've got a new project in mind. It takes me back to Latin America, back to Mexico, and it's a very interesting, underreported, but very dramatic World War II story set in Mexico. So I'm really excited about this one. I think people will be interested.
And we're certainly interested. We'd like to hear more about that. And who do you consider biggest influence in your career?
Gosh, I guess I'd have to say my mother, who always held my writing to a very high standard. And I keep trying to reach it.
Okay. I think that's a really good one to understand. And what's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
Follow your dreams, but realize often that it'll take a lot of hard work. And there'll be moments of great doubt, but work through that and you can achieve amazing things.
I think that's really good advice as well, too. We should put that to use. We're here with the multi-talented Aran Shetterly of Morningside, the 1979 Greensboro Massacre, and the Struggle for American City and Soul, and the Mike Wagner Show. Aran, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely fantastic. Learned a lot. Looking forward to having you soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Love to have you back. And once again, what's your website? How do people contact you? Where can people purchase or check out your works?
Yep, AranShetterly.com. Great place to do it. You can also find me on social media, but I prefer email. So through my website, it's just great.
And what's your website again?
AranShetterly.com. ARAN Shetterly.com.
All right, we'll have everybody check it out. Once again, Aran, very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely amazing. Learned a lot. Looking forward to having you soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Love to have you back. We wish all the best. And Aran, you definitely have a great future ahead of you.
Thanks so much, man. Great to be with you.
The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios. If you're looking to start or upgrade your online presence, visit www.sonicwebstudios.com for all of your online needs. Call 1-800-303-3960 or visit us online at www.sonicwebstudios.com to get started today. Mention the Mike Wagner Show and get 20% off your project. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level.
Hi, I'm Burl Barer, legendary American author, and I'm here to tell you about Missing, the new mystery suspense novel by Mian Mosensia. It's really a good book. Very surprising. Never metaphor I didn't like, especially in this book. Here you have a main character whose life has been filled with despair. His wife died in 9/11. His young daughter died of a rare disease. He's not a happy camper. What does he do for a living? He's a physical fitness trainer. When somebody hardly knows, somebody he's never met, he only has encountered them on an internet chat line, goes missing. This is his journey. He's going to go rescue them. This is his search for redemption, his search for his own personal promised land. He couldn't do anything about the death of his wife, the death of his child, but maybe he could rescue this woman he's never met. That is, if she exists. Missing by Mian Mosensia, international in scope, vastly entertaining, full of surprises. I suggest you get it, either paperback or an electronic edition for your Kindle. Missing by by Mian Mosensia.
The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Serena Wagner's book, The Sweet Psalmist, now available on Amazon. This book includes 30 exquisite paintings by well-known and unknown painters and King David Psalms. The Sweet Psalmist gives us a new perspective on his life in this book. Through the Psalms he wrote, his time as a shepherd in the field is where the book starts, and it goes on to describe his complicated and turbulent relationship with King Saul as well as other events. It's a story of love, betrayal, repentance, and more. It also offers advice on approaching God and living a life that pleases him. Check out the book, The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, now available on Amazon. Keywords, Sweet Psalmist, Serena Wagner.
Thanks for listening to the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Anchor FM, Radio Public, and themikewagnershow.com. Please support our program with your donations at themikewagnershow.com. Join us again next time for another great episode of The Mike Wagner Show.